Hello, I'm Mishka, and this channel is the Helsinki Renaissance, where we will be talking about arts and culture in hopefully the most eye-opening of all possible manners. Now, I don't know if we can reach such grand levels of operation, but I'll have to try because I ended up talking with a certain viewer in an older video where I suppose I was talking about how, in my view, the critics and viewers, the critics and film fans of Finnish cinema are basically letting our film culture down. And it never occurred to me that when I made those claims, that the only viewers that I could conceivably have are the people that I'm directly accusing of causing the problem that we now face in this particular sector of Finnish culture. So those viewers that I'm accusing of causing the problem aren't necessarily going to be the ones who are most receptive to the message in the video. But unfortunately, because I feel so strongly about it, I have to, well, the way I see it is that some people are as if asleep on the wheel, and perhaps they will be slightly cranky if I try to wake them up, but, you know, it's just, it has to happen. So, anyway, I have some videos on this channel that are actually they were done so long ago that they were actually done before I got properly interested in Finnish cinema. So before I started researching it, those older videos basically have me with long hair. So they were done for an earlier channel and just re-uploaded here. So anyway, there are videos where I too am talking, if not entirely dismissively, at least mostly with a disinterested tonality towards Finnish cinema. So I'm the first to admit that one, that there is a huge problem with Finnish film culture, and that I used to be part of that problem. But the difference between me and other people is that I admit that I used to be part of the problem. Faubourg, who used to be probably the single most important person in the history of Finnish cinema, Faubourg also admitted that he used to be part of the problem. He said in a documentary that when he was young, he regarded himself as being guilty of, quote, pointlessly belittling Finnish filmmaking. And, you know, that's exactly what I think that I used to be guilty of. And I think that it's for the same reason. Is that there's a certain kind of misguided attempts at cosmopolitanism that some young people go for. In that, you know, if François Truffaut says that taste is the result of 1,000 distastes, so that if people need to form their aesthetic presence through, let's say, some sort of a list of distastes, then certainly if we follow the familiarity breeds contempt formula of, let's say, basic psychology, then obviously if a person is familiar with certain facets of Finnish culture whilst living in Finland, that might be part of that, being overtly familiar with them and then putting all of those things to their list of distastes, for instance. And Peter von Bug, he said that when he was young, he as if did that on autopilot, just absent-mindedly without realizing what he was doing. And I said that I basically also did that. And that's the reason why I feel like I've seen the error of my ways in that I just, there's a situation that Finnish audiences, Finnish film fans and Finnish film critics, they're saying that the Finnish film industry professionals need to try harder, need to do some greater contributions, but the other people in the film culture in Finland are hypocrites in that they aren't doing any greater contributions to themselves. They complain that film industry professionals are cruising on autopilot, but they are cruising on autopilot themselves as film fans or film critics. So that this thing that Peter von Bug eventually woke up to, and I eventually woke up to, is that we need to just stop cruising on autopilot with the film culture in Finland. Otherwise, we get the culture we deserve, and that culture is essentially worthless if it's just, bunch of somnambulists being like slow motion bumper cars or something. But it's not enough, and lots of people in Finland obviously can sign on to notions that our film scene isn't enough. Like Finnish film industry people are more than happy to sign on to saying that what we have is not enough. Everyone can agree about that, but what almost no one seems to want to agree to, that they would personally be doing something wrong. And in that earlier video that I was doing, I was just underlining that yes, it's obvious that the cinema released in Finland in the last couple of decades, for instance, it hasn't been exactly an endless string of masterpieces. But, it's the film, the way I see it is that there are very few elements in the film culture that are working the way that they should be working. So that rather than everyone just blaming the filmmakers themselves, and we can blame them, I'm not saying that, but rather than just everyone focusing on people on top of the pyramid, people should look towards elsewhere as well, and start spotting where it is that something other than the best kinds of moves are being made. And that's what I've been trying to point towards in earlier videos. And obviously, no one wants to hear that because they are like, slow motion sleepwalkers living like bumper cars in our culture. And that's what they have so far been doing. That's what they seem to be content doing, and they don't want some vloggers telling them to do something else. But I am telling people to do something else, because just like our filmmakers aren't quite enough, our film critics certainly aren't quite enough, and our film fans, they don't even want to be quite enough. So we have a bit of a problem here, but I think that this problem is universal, so it's not Finland specific, but unfortunately we could have an easy escape out of this problem, but I'm saying we'd need slight help from the international marketplace, and we aren't getting it right now because a lot of Finnish art isn't exported quite enough for that. So anyway, if I said that I have slight problems with Finnish audiences and Finnish film critics, I'd say that I'd say that they are linked problems, but they are problems because of different reasons. I mean, they are separate problems even though they are linked, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I'll try to give my ideas about them simultaneously. So if I mention Peter von Bug, him talking about seeing himself as in his youth being guilty of belittling the Finnish film culture, and I would argue that he couldn't entirely shake it off ever. So even though Peter von Bug, he was a gentleman, so like it's not his style to be standoffish, but I just think that he was a product of his culture, and because there wasn't a culture of celebrating Finnish cinema, he couldn't ever quite feel natural getting enthusiastic about Finnish cinema the way that he could get enthusiastic about classics of world cinema, let's say. So anyway, even though if I have foreign viewers, they certainly think that Finnish cinema is part of world cinema, because, well, basically world cinema, I suppose, means non-English language cinema much of the time. So it's a somewhat random term, but I suppose how people treat it is that I guess they just mean non-English language cinema. So anyway, this situation, like at the heart of the problem certainly is the idea that Finnish audiences and foreign audiences would have some sort of diametrically opposed attitudes towards Finnish films. And talking about Peter von Bug, who I don't wish to criticize at all because he has rendered the greatest services, some Andri Langlois-esque services to Finnish film culture, no one's done more than he has here, except maybe Valentin Vaala, and Toivo Särkkä. But anyway, we don't need to get into that. I just want to use both Peter von Bug and myself as examples that if a person isn't conscious of the problem, they can very easily be part of it. And I'm trying to demonstrate how this problem with Finnish film culture is formed. So anyway, when I said that Peter von Bug was guilty of belittling Finnish filmmakers, I'm saying that he did that in his capacity as an audience member rather than as a professional critic. So I think that in Finland, certain critics are part of the problem. I never thought that Peter von Bug would have been part of that problem. So I suppose that's why I'm... I'll talk about the film fans as being part of the problem first. So anyway, I brought some CDs, and anyway, here's a couple of works of classical music. Anyway, the problem that I'm seeking to demonstrate with Finnish audiences is that here's works from all over Europe. Aino is an opera by Erkki Melartin. Here's this is medieval Minnea singers. Here's another sample of medieval music, Italian opera, and recorder sonatas from Ghent. Ghent was in one of those Benelux countries. I apologize that I can't remember whether it was Belgium or Netherlands. I should know where Ghent is, but I just can't remember it right now. But anyway, the situation that I'm wishing to demonstrate with these works of classical music is that, by the way, first of I should say that all of these are relatively obscure. So one of the reasons why I'm having this as CDs is because I tried to find this Glogau songbook songs on YouTube and they just weren't there. So these are obscure enough not to be on YouTube, which, you know, should say something. But anyway, the idea is that Finnish audiences, who I would classify as being part of that group of misguided cosmopolitans, they might think that some Baroque music like this, Italian opera like this, and some medieval, I suppose you'd call them early popular music, that they might have some interest as like interesting works of art. But then this Erkki Melartin opera called Aino, I believe that lots of Finnish audiences would think that this qualifies as something almost like a dissonant note. In that Finnish audiences, they act very differently than Italian audiences. So in Italy, they built their repertoire mostly on their own country's works. So something like Francisco Cavalli, you know, this isn't part of any of the. This isn't the biggest part of any repertoire, but Cavalli can just sort of be on the fringes of either the Italian repertoire or the international repertoire, in that you know, once in a great while you can see some Cavalli, but anyway, I just believe that you know, how it is that Finnish audiences and Italian audiences act are very different, and this is why I'm making a video about the problem with Finnish, let's say, culture rather than problem with Italian culture, because the way that I see it is that Italians appreciate their own art either just right or sometimes almost excessively. Stendhal, for instance, wrote in his book called De l'Amour that he can't have conversations with Italians because they are just so nonsensically defensive of all of their own artists. And when Stendhal said their own artist, he meant that Florentine artist in Firenze or Milanese artist in Milan or something. And that kind of regional scene, so elevated the natives that they could do no wrong, and if they were criticized ever, it almost caused riots. And so, Stendhal as a Frenchman couldn't entirely coexist with the Italian scene, even though he loved Italy. But anyway, in Finland, we have a completely opposite view. Is that if someone, whether a native or a foreigner, insulted an Erkki Melartin opera, it most assuredly would not cause riots, because Erkki Melartin just doesn't have any kind of fan base in Finland. Even though Melartin at times is almost as good as Jean Sibelius. Let that sink in. Melartin is basically, the next best thing that we have in Finland for Sibelius, but no one is really that into Erkki Melartin, and certainly not into an old Finnish opera from Melartin, even if they would appreciate the odd symphony or concerto from Melartin. But anyway, just this idea that some Finnish aesthetes, for instance, of the misguided cosmopolitan attitude, they would think that this Erkki Melartin opera is like a dissonant note in my selections. So if I have some Stax solo here, so some American music and then some European music, they would sort of perhaps give approving notes to everything except the one Finnish work. And the reason why I'm saying this, and the reason why I'm saying that this is not a Finland-specific situation, is because I'm suggesting that there is some sort of an attitude that things that are artistic and things that are exotic are somehow ever so slightly entwined. So that, if there is some sort of a familiarity breeds contempt situation, it's because Finland is the one country on the planet where a Finnish opera cannot ever be exotic. I mean, there's perhaps something quirky about a Finnish opera, but it certainly cannot be exotic. More popular operas by Aulis Sallinen, for instance, they aren't exotic. I mean, Finnish opera, it just doesn't reach the condition of exotic ever in Finland. However, I think that, there's a massive silver lining in this situation, is that there's only 5 million Finnish people on the planet, and then, well, some expatriates and descendants of Finns in United States and Sweden. But anyway, there aren't that many Finnish people, so it's basically leaving the vast majority of audiences as not somehow immune to the possible exotic charms of Finnish works, because Finland, even in the European context, Finland can be seen as even to its nearest neighbors, Finland can be seen as quite the exotic place. And I suggested in an earlier video that actually what will propel Finnish art into making some sort of an international breakthrough is precisely this situation, and no Finnish viewer will see it coming, because Finnish audiences are immune to the exotic nature of Finnish art, but all foreign audiences, even Swedish, Russian, or Estonian audiences, who are Finland's nearest neighbors, even those neighbors will see Finnish art as heightenedly exotic. So in as much as for most people artistry and exoticism are somehow entwined, I believe what will cause a breakthrough of Finnish art eventually is precisely that demand for exoticism. So that if for Finnish audiences there is some sort of a combo breaker here, in that they think that this Erkki Melartin opera is the work that they are least interested in, which is, if that's true, if some Finnish people would slightly groan at the idea of watching a Kalevala-themed opera, I mean, it's rather spectacular, because these recorder sonatas, recorder is nokkahuilu in Finnish, and that's the least respected instrument out there, perhaps second only to triangle. And no one really shows any kind of interest in the Glogau songbook, and folks just keep passing by this Cavalli opera, which is excellent, but it's just not. This isn't popular stuff. So it's really saying something if Finnish audiences, in this suggestion that I'm making, is that Finnish audiences would be more than happy to give all of this a chance, but not to this. That I see as the problem in Finland. But thankfully, it's a problem that's easily solved, because if all foreign audiences, Australian, Japanese, Chinese, people from Morocco or Brazil or Canada, if all of those people can see Finland as exotic, then they don't see any kind of huge drop-off between Erkki Melartin and, say, Francesco Cavalli. Melartin probably not gonna make his name with his operas, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least if international audiences thought that out of all of this world music, that Erkki Melartin and his symphonies and some of his violin concertos, for instance, that Erkki Melartin is actually the most interesting artist of all of these that I'm holding here. And, certainly for Americans, this Stax stuff, it's not that exotic, perhaps Erkki Melartin could be the most exotic out of all of these artists that I have here. If there is some sort of a international breakthrough going to happen with Finnish art, it's precisely because of that intertwined nature of artistry and exoticism, and that for better or worse, people usually tend to demand that the art that they support is somehow exotic. So I'd say that is the kind of situation that the reason why Finnish art can't take off right now is because people just look at some idea that this Finnish artist would try to get this opera, just into the marketplace, try to get some attention to it, but Finnish audiences just keep passing by because they keep assuming that because this is a Finnish opera, it cannot be good. So, Italian audiences would probably dismiss this because it's Finnish, and there's no tradition of success in Finnish opera. Whereas with Italian opera, there is Germans might not like me saying this, but I mean, Italian opera is, let's put it this way, opera is an Italian word, so it is still an Italian art form, and Mozart, for instance, was doing most of his operas in Italian. I believe Handel also did basically all of them in Italian. So, because the tradition of Italian opera is so strong in Italy, they keep applauding their own tradition. And I'm saying that the Finnish art scene, with only a couple of moves, we could move away from being the diametrically opposite art scene from Italy to actually being like the Italian art scene. So apparently the hugely controversial claim that I've been making in a lot of my early videos is that I actually think that Finland, if the 5 big art scenes in Europe are France, Italy, England, Russia, Germany, if those are the big 5, then I think that in the second category of that kind of welterweight art scenes, I actually think that across the board, I very much believe that Finland is actually not just a dark horse contender, but actually just the most, top to bottom, best of the second group of art scenes. And I think that Finland, just from music to cinema to literature to the visual arts and whatever, pop music, all of that stuff, I think that Finland has the greatest range out of all of those countries in the second category. And, just with a couple of moves, the Finnish art scene could assume what I see is its rightful place. In that, works by Erkki Melartin, for instance, I mean, they don't need to win with exoticism, in that there is, I mean, there's no novelty to Erkki Melartin. I mean, I wonder if people would say that the idiom is late romantic, but anyway, that is a fairly standard sound at this stage with classical music. So it's not something that has a lot of novelty, but it's giving people what they want. And I think that most foreign audiences would be downright shocked over just how much hidden gems there essentially are in the Finnish culture, and they probably would be shocked about how dismissive and how indifferent Finnish people are. For instance, like I'm just saying it, if I have Finnish viewers, if I have, let's say that for every 100 Finnish viewers, maybe 2 or 3 care about Erkki Melartin. Like, he's just ignored. Like, we are ignoring all of our artists. We don't have the kind of Italian scene where we care about whatever are the Francesco Cavallis of our scene. You know, I realize that most Italians, because Cavalli isn't really a celebrity, most Italians wouldn't make too much of him as well, but Italians wouldn't be somehow, they wouldn't position themselves against Cavalli the way that Finnish might position themselves against like some sort of a Finnish opera like this. That's the viewer problem that we have in Finland. In that, you know, for instance, I mean, this is potentially a controversial claim, but I think that French films tend to have pretty bad dialogue. For instance, the dialogue in a lot of French films seems merely perfunctory, you know, like the films obviously have other high points, but like you know, the kind of verbal dexterity that some kind of Hollywood films, for instance, might have, I think that that's almost unknown to a lot of the classics of French cinema. But no one in the history of Finnish film criticism would have ever considered being dismissive towards the dialogue writing in French films. Why? Well, one, because most Finnish audience members wouldn't be in a position to evaluate the dialogue in French films, but also because of that exoticism. So because there is a certain level of something exotic with the French culture, you know, it's like some sort of a safety net that when somebody isn't overtly familiar with what is happening, they in the absence of evidence, they have faith that is really good. But with dialogue about or dialogue with Finnish cinema, for instance, because Finnish audiences are so familiar with Finnish language and to some extent with Finnish drama, people can do nothing but criticize the dialogue in Finnish cinema. So even though you know, I would agree that there's no tradition of verbal dexterity with Finnish films, people can say that the dialogue writing is frequently second-rate, but I would say that that's second-rate only when contrasted to the most legendary samples of whether you're looking for wit or insight or you know, some sort of a flair with the writing. Like, it's only second-rate when contrasted to that, and in reality, the dialogue writing in Finnish cinema is frequently just the, you know, it's the European norm. There's just average dialogue. But, you know, if French films have average dialogue and Finnish films have average dialogue, it's that they're merely perfunctory. People say that the French films have great dialogue and Finnish films have horrible dialogue. So that kind of, you know, difference like night and day with these evaluations is what creates this mess. But ultimately, like, there is some justice in the world in that foreigners who don't have excessive familiarity with Finnish drama or Finnish language, for them, everything in Finnish cinema can play like French cinema. So whether the dialogue is good or not, they're not in a position to evaluate it, so they don't evaluate it harshly. So that everything that is sort of, let's say that part of the norm, that foreigners can positively evaluate the norm when Finnish critics are evaluating it negatively. And something like that is what critics aren't particularly self-conscious of that trend in let's say film culture, so that there are things like that that are somehow just inseparably linked with the film culture that can be part of that trend of Finnish art making some sort of an international breakthrough. And most Finnish viewers, I would imagine, and please, if you disagree, please state it right now, because I feel so strongly that I'm in the right, that I will gladly have proofs that I was one of the few who felt like this initially. So every proof that I was in the minority of holding this view will be greatly appreciated, because it just demonstrates the case that I'm making. If all Finnish people are like Erkki Melartin opera, wow, that sounds like the most awesomest time ever, then obviously it would not back up my case that this one Finnish work would be like a dissonant note in this otherwise cosmopolitan symphony of international items. That I do need Finnish people to be slightly dismissive towards Erkki Melartin operas to prove my case. So please, just saying that for the record. But anyway, I've mostly been talking about my views on how Finnish audiences are behaving, and I'd rather now shift to talking about the Finnish film critics. And again, I want to state for the record that I never thought that Peter von Bug was part of the problem with that. I mean, he was always the best kind of a film writer in Finland. But anyway, I'll just have one way of demonstrating the problem with critics, and as I said, it's not a Finland-specific problem. So Jonathan Rosenbaum tells this story about being part of the jury or part of the selection committee for the New York Film Festival some decades ago. And he tells this story that some films started playing, and like 20 or 30 minutes in, one person rose from their seats and walked away. And then 2 minutes later, other people started sort of shifting in their seat. And when one other person rose from their seat, everyone else in the audience, besides Jonathan Rosenbaum, had walked out of the theater. And what Jonathan Rosenbaum said is that either this is the most flagrant sample of peer pressure and groupthink ever recorded, or alternatively, there's the most remarkable coincidence that every other critic had exactly the same kind of taste, and they lost their patience with the movie exactly at the same time, exactly for the same reasons. Like, all of these independent operators just independently arrived at the same conclusions at the same time. I mean, the odds of that happening are astronomical. So, like, Jonathan Rosenbaum wasn't saying that was a sample of group thinking critics. He wasn't saying that. But he was suggesting that there's the possibility that that episode highlighted if there is any group thinking critics that demonstrates it. Jonathan Rosenbaum wasn't saying that there's group thinking critics. Let's say that I'm saying it, but if you want to consider the possibility, please take this opportunity to consider the possibility that everything wrong about critics across the board is that there is some sort of a fairly boneheaded consensus, and people pretend to be independent operators, but really they're just boring the audience with conventional stances that really anyone and everyone else could have made as well. So if critics should be there so that the audiences could either gain some sort of a deeper understanding of some works of art, or alternatively that they could have some sort of a fresh and interesting takes to situations. Well, the takes that critics have are neither fresh nor interesting, and they certainly aren't contributing to anyone gaining any understanding of anything, deep or shallow, when the critics are part of some sort of a lemming army that's just moving in, unison. That everyone does what everyone else is doing as well. Like, Jonathan Rosenbaum was the only free man in that theater. He was the only independent operator. And whether we like Jonathan Rosenbaum or not, whether we agree with him or not, he was the only one in that theater doing his job. He was the only one who had any kind of even elementary understanding of what he should do. Now, you could say that if the selection committee for a film festival had to see hundreds of movies in a week, that they just had to start prioritizing with their time. You could say that, you could make the argument, and I'm not saying that it's a bad argument, but I am saying that there is a tradition of groupthink with critics, and I'm saying that things like that demonstrate it, and even if critics could have been excused for that one isolated instance, they certainly aren't excused for doing that around the clock every single time. Where are our fresh and interesting takes? Where is the deeper understanding anyone gains from reading criticisms? It's not there because the lemming army isn't capable of producing any of the things that they should produce. I don't mean to rant, but it's clear that there's something rotten in the state of modern criticism. And you could say that because old media is struggling, so the landscape is changing, and there's some amateur critics of the new media, let's say I'm one, and then there's the older critics of the old media who are all either out of a job or they just have to hack it out because that's what their editors want. Perhaps there's problems. Perhaps it's not easy to be some sort of a dazzling scene-making talent as a critic. Perhaps all of those things are true and fair, and I shouldn't give anyone a hard time for not doing the right thing. However, our film culture is in a bad state, and we desperately need some people to start doing the right thing. It can't just be that Aki Kaurismäki is the only Finnish person in the Finnish film culture who is doing the right thing, who is doing what he should be doing. Like, just what? Aki Kaurismäki and no one else. I mean, that's not enough. When Jari Litmanen was the greatest Finnish football player of all time, he was part of the greatest generation of Finnish football players. He had talent around him. You know, he wasn't just some sort of a lone peak. But Aki Kaurismäki is a lone peak. And it is because those critics that we have, they aren't doing the right thing. So anyway, I said that I got into some comments with a certain viewer of mine about Finnish cinema. So I was just saying that, well, I was just pointing out these problems that I have with Finnish art scene, and he was disagreeing that there's any problem. So anyway, I said that, well, I mean, I've been trying to demonstrate some of the problems that I think are pretty sort of spectacularly self-evident about our culture. But just the problem is that if our culture is like a pyramid, the people lower down the pyramid only see problems at those on the top, whereas I'm saying that everyone in that pyramid is equally participating in the problem. So that's the point of disagreement that some people have, and that there are those who think that only those on the top are part of the problems, but not true. Not true. And you know, just if I return to the critics situation, if critics are just, it's uncharitable in the extreme to call critics a lemming army. I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm trying to somehow be able to describe the situation. So anyway, if one part of the problem is that nothing in Finland disturbs the status quo. Like, we have the films currently released in Finland are mediocre in the extreme. I mean, across Europe, there's bad filmmaking. You know, the European film scenes right now are not in a good shape. So across Europe, badly made, boring films are being released. Finland is no different. And there is this status quo that nothing disturbs, and critics are, you know, a bedrock of that undisturbed status quo. And I'm trying to be a disruptor. I am trying to disturb the status quo, and one of the ways that I'm trying to disturb the status quo is recognizing that if we break cinema into 4 eras, the silent film era, the classical era, or the golden age, the new wave era, which let's say we stretch it to mid-70s, and then the modern era after that. My way of trying to disrupt this film culture that we have in Finland is to get people to stop focusing on the modern films, because Aki Kaurismäki and a couple of filmmakers excluded, the modern Finnish cinema isn't that special. The new wave era is merely, you know, mediocre. But the classical, the golden age of Finnish cinema, just like the golden age of French cinema, with artists like Jean Renoir, Robert Bresson, Jean-Pierre Melville, Jean Cocteau, you know, who am I missing? Well, I mean, all of the great directors in golden age of French cinema, I mean, that is arguably the best period in the history of French cinema, and so too with Finland. Like the artists like Valentin Vaala and Hannu Leminen, they are first-rate talents in the European film scene. Just like the French artists are popular outside France, just like the Italian composers are popular outside Italy, Finnish composers should be popular outside Finland, as Sibelius, for instance, is. Melartin should be just as much. But I'm saying that Finnish cinema also, with all of those guys like Matti Kassila, Edwin Laine, Erkki Karu, some parts of Ilmari Unho, Risto Orko, Toivo Särkkä, they should be internationally regarded, because I made, just for experiment's sake, I made a top 100 French films list of, just personal favorites of mine, and I made a top 100 Finnish films list. And if there are four eras in cinema, the silent films, classical, new wave, modern, what were similarities with my French list and Finnish list is that almost no modern films, just a couple of entries here and there, and very few silent films, because I don't think that the French and the Finnish silent film tradition, I don't think it can compete with the best silent film scenes, which were United States, Russia, and Germany. But then, the French New Wave tradition is obviously far superior to the Finnish New Wave tradition, but the Golden Age films dominated both lists. It's just how my own tastes are, in that, I think that from mid-30s to late 50s, the films by Jacques Becker and Robert Bresson, Jean-Pierre Melville, so on. I just think that those Golden Age films are my favorite films from both France and Finland, and it's perhaps a controversial claim that I am making, but I think that my list of Finnish films was almost as good as my list of French films. Now, a top 100, it essentially has a couple of tiers, in that the top tier is maybe like the biggest favorites, that let's say that the drop-off point is like between 15 and 25, and then there's the second tier and let's say a third tier, and obviously the tiers were different sized, so that in the top and the second tier with the French selections were slightly bigger, so that if I kept adding some late period Luis Buñuel films, for instance, as the Buñuel is Spanish, the films were French, like The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, for instance, the Buñuel films kept stacking up the second tier, and the French first tier was a lot bigger than the Finnish first tier, and the French second tier was slightly bigger than the Finnish second tier, but nonetheless, I mean, French film culture is more highly regarded than the Finnish film culture, but the Golden Age films dominated both lists, and I thought that the Finnish list surprisingly held its own against the masterpieces of French cinema. So I think that our film culture is a strong one. We just don't have people focusing on the right things. And that's what my videos are trying to focus on. But my voice is starting to give up on me, so I have to end this video. If anyone watched this, thank you for watching, and I'll keep mentioning this in other videos. But anyway, that was all for now. Thank you for watching, and Bye bye.